August Bournonville was born in Copenhagen in 1805 as son of the great French principal dancer Antoine Bournonville and his Swedish housekeeper and later wife Louise Sundberg. With these parents, he did not have a single drop of Danish blood in his veins. Anyhow, today, more than 200 years after his birth, we Danes regard him and his ballets as the quintessence of Danish culture. From 1830 to 1875, that is, for nearly half a century, Bournonville led the Danish ballet, assembled a fine staff, and built up a repertory of more than 50 works, of which 12 ballets and minor divertissements have survived in an unbroken performance tradition and are regularly performed to this very day. Moreover, Bournonville carefully reorganized the Danish ballet school by forming such solid foundations that his spirit and art still dominates the Royal Danish Ballet, now almost 125 years after his death in 1879. This fact is perhaps the greatest and most profound of his many achievements. The most decisive years in the early formation of Bournonville, however, were undoubtedly his 6 years of study in Paris between 1824 and 1829. Although he had received a basic education and performing experience within his father's ballets in Copenhagen, his long sojourn in Paris must have opened a completely new world of dance to his amazed eyes. Antoine's education of his son in Copenhagen thus seems to have consisted mainly in securing a basic understanding of the great 18th century French choreographer Jean-Georges Nouvert's methods, while August's further instruction abroad seems to have been the result mainly of his own personal zeal and determination. Arriving in Paris on his own in the spring of 1824, at the age of only 19, Bournonville began a completely new period in his life that was to determine the later course of his whole social life and professional career. Ballet in Paris during the mid-1820s was an art form in the midst of profound transformations, whereas some of the leading Paris opera choreographers in these years, like Pierre Gardel and Jean Coralie, continued to stage rather conventional ballets based on subjects popular in the previous century. Others were already working on bringing new themes, new techniques, and a new style to the theater arts. This new romantic movement forced ballet to develop from mainly a decorative art form into a profound search for new artistic formula that would appeal more directly to the spectator's mind rather than speaking only to his eyes and aesthetic senses. It was in the middle of this hot cultural Parisian melting pot that our young Danish aspirant dancer, August Bournonville, suddenly found himself in 1824. Recognizing that he first of all needed to master the exciting artistic innovations and new dance technique that was brought forward by an eminent dancer as Auguste Vestris, Bournonville immediately sought his help. Vestris thus became the most important single source for Bournonville's acquisition of the newest of dance technique in those days. He took daily classes with this outstanding French teacher for well over 2 years, as a result of which he successfully passed an examination at the Paris Opera on March 10, 1826, which secured him the right to appear in a series of debut performances at the opera. Passing these tests with equal success, he became engaged in 1826 for a period of 4 years as a so-called premier double at the Paris Opera, and with a special contractual addition of extra pay in recognition of his great dance talent. In these early Parisian years of study, Bournonville not only received some of the most fundamental tools for his later career as ballet master and choreographer in Copenhagen, but also gained great experience as dance teacher, pedagogue and ballet instructor, from which he profited extensively during his later working years in Copenhagen. As we have already heard, his father, the French-born dancer Antoine Bournonville, first trained the young Bournonville in Copenhagen during his childhood and early teenage years. However, the Bournonville training system, as we know it today, was only definitively formed thanks to his 6 years of studies in Paris from 1824 to 1829. Bournonville should therefore primarily be regarded as a prime product of the school of Auguste Vestris and the Paris Opera. In his early ballets in Copenhagen, he consequently created many roles, especially for himself, which still today continue to harvest acclaim all over the world for their pure Vestris style and strong position of the male dancer. But Bournonville also trained and promoted many fine female dancers in Copenhagen, who together came to represent the ideal product of his school and the quintessence of his teaching methods and choreographic style. His spirit and organization of the ballet school at Copenhagen's Royal Theatre thus still dominates the Royal Danish Ballet 2 centuries after his birth. The dearest possession of Danish ballet are therefore his ballets that have survived to this day and his training system, which we generally refer to as the 6 daily Bournonville classes, or the Monday school, Tuesday school, and so on. Bournonville himself was certainly aware of to whom he was artistically indebted. His training system was, as I pointed out, solidly based on the French ballet school that flourished during the first half of the 19th century, and which he succeeded in transplanting to the then rather isolated northern parts of Europe. In one of his earliest books, he thus made his first public comment about his encounter and 6 years of study in Paris in the 1820s with Auguste Vestris. The impact this great teacher had on him is here described with these words. I refer to the school that Auguste Vestris founded, when he deviated from the straight lines and the constant dancing en face, and gave the dance flexibility in its lines, and removed the pedantry that was ridiculous in such a transient art, which even when most difficult should be pleasurable. No one can thus be said to have preserved the teaching methods and ideals of Vestris more devotedly than Bournonville, who during his long career as head of Copenhagen's Royal Ballet and its School of Dance founded a style which in fact still today is the purest expressions of Vestris style that has survived from the 19th century. After returning to Copenhagen in 1829, he began a lifelong career as ballet master and the main choreographer of the Royal Danish Ballet. His remarkable choreographic career in Denmark can be divided into 4 main periods, the first of which covered the years between 1829 and 1841. During this first 12-year period, he was strongly influenced by the French school of dance. Consequently, the ballets created or mounted in these years were either thoroughly revised or slightly adapted versions of some of the most important French pantomimic ballets of the time, such as, for instance, La Somnambule, Les Pages du Duc de Vendôme,